R16 Disassembly and Reassembly. Tools and materials needed. Remove the screw to release the upper splash guard spring. Remove the wire hose clamp and pull off the water hose. Flip the unit over to remove the lower splash guard. Loosen the locking screw, then drift out the pin to release the guard. Loosen both guide tensioner knobs and then the drive tensioner knob. Using the lock nut wrench and the T-wrench, loosen the arbor bolt, then remove the flange and drive wheel to withdraw the blade. Use an M4 L-hex wrench to loosen the 4 screws to remove the right-hand main housing. The upper splash guard may now be removed. Remove the water plate by removing the 2 Phillips head screws to the water manifold, then use an M2.5 L-hex key to remove the other 4 screws. Adjust the drive tensioner knob to align the screw heads with the slots in the casing. Loosen the 4 screws using an M5 L-hex key. Ensure the unit is positioned with the blade side up. Lift away the left-hand main housing, taking care not to spill the gear oil. Dump the gear oil into a container. To remove the side handle, first loosen the small screw with an M3 L-hex wrench. Remove the remaining 3 screws with an M6 L-hex wrench. The side handle may now be lifted away. The tension rollers should be replaced if their grooves are worn flat. To renew the tension rollers, use an M21 wrench on the hex washer to immobilize the shaft and loosen the knot with an M13 wrench. The hex washer and roller may now be removed. If the bearings are worn, loose or notchy feeling, the tension roller carriers need to be replaced as a unit. Remove the tension roller carrier by removing the fixing screw with an M2.5 L-hex wrench and the pivot screws with an M3 L-hex wrench. Repeat for the other side. Note that the upper and lower tension roller carriers are stamped on their outward-facing sides with A and B respectively. To remove the guide rollers, use an M21 wrench on the hex washer to immobilize the shaft and loosen the knot with an M13 wrench. The guide rollers should be replaced if the width of their grooves are worn to about 1.4 millimeters or less. New or 2.9 millimeter width. If the bearings are worn, replace as follows. Remove the plugs by pulling straight out with linesman pliers. Use an M13 wrench on the knot and temporarily replace the hex washer to allow the knot to be loosened. Tap out the guide roller axle toward the blade side. Avoid damaging the threads. Pry out the oil seal. Remove the internal circlip using circlip pliers. Tap out the inside bearing toward the blade side. Avoid damaging the bore. Tap out the outside bearing toward the outside using a socket with a diameter slightly smaller than the bore. Always replace with new bearings and seals. Loosen the 2 socket cap screws with an M4 L-hex wrench. Loosen the 6 Phillips head screws to remove the left handle half. Remove the switch actuator and spring, then free the LED indicator light. Remove the 2 screws to remove the inner cord clip. Free the 3 power wires and electronic wire harness. Clip the 3 power wires as close as possible to the butt connectors. Use the spudger tool to free the 2 electronics harness plugs and switch harness plugs from the electronics unit. Remove the ground wire using an M3 L-hex wrench. Remove the 2 socket cap screws to free the right handle half. Using an M14 wrench, remove the water inlet hose. Using an M3 L-hex wrench, remove the electronics unit. Loosen the inlet hose fitting with an M14 wrench. Use an M22 wrench to loosen the cable gland nut. Carefully feed the 3 power wires, then the electronics harness through the nut. Free the cable gland seal, then feed the wires through the seal. Remove the outlet hose bar with an M10 wrench. Use an M21 open-end wrench specially ground for clearance to immobilize the rotor shaft. Use an M17 box wrench to loosen the knot. Pry the bevel pinion gear off the shaft. Pull the parallel key off the rotor shaft with pliers. Evenly loosen the 4 socket cap screws with an M4 L-hex wrench to remove the gear housing. Separate the gear housing from the motor by tapping with a mallet. Pull the rotor out by hand. The magnetism of the rotor will be resisting you. Avoid touching the body of the rotor with bare hands to prevent rust. Evenly loosen the 4 socket cap screws on the motor tail cover with an M4 L-hex wrench. Tap the motor tail cover with a soft blow mallet to free it. Then feed the power wires and electronics harness through the cable gland. Remove the water seal gaskets and discard. Always use new gaskets on reassembly. The main components of the disassembled machine. Now to reassembly. To prevent rust, oil the rotor and do not handle it with bare hands during reassembly. Insert the rotor in the gear housing. Fit a new water seal gasket on the gear housing. Orient the stator so that the power wires face toward the screw hole indicated. Then slide the stator onto the rotor. Start the M5x30 socket cap screws and spring washers into the motor housing, then evenly and gradually tighten the screws to draw the 2 sides together. Set a torque wrench to 9 Newton meters and tighten the screws diagonally. Fit a new water seal gasket on the motor tail cover. Feed the electronics harness, then the 3 power wires through the cable gland in the motor tail cover. Start the M5x45 socket cap screws into the motor housing, then evenly and gradually tighten the screws to draw the 2 sides together. With the torque wrench set to 9 Newton meters, tighten the screws diagonally. The motor must be tested for water leaks with a test apparatus before being put back into service. Install the side with a valve and a BSPT 1/8 inch thread on the outlet side. Use thread sealing tape. Install the side with a valve, a pressure gauge, and a BSPT 1/4 inch thread on the inlet side. First test with compressed air. Close the valve so that about 35 to 40 psi is showing on the gauge, and wait for at least 30 minutes. No drop in pressure is permitted. If the unit passes the compressed air test, proceed to the water pressure test. Adjust the outlet valve so that about 40 psi is showing on the gauge, and wait for at least 2 hours. No drop in pressure is permitted. Any pressure test failure requires the unit be disassembled again to resolve the leak. Remove the test apparatus and proceed with reassembly. Install the 1/8 inch BSPT hose barb to the front of the motor and tighten with an M10 wrench. Use thread seal tape. Install the 1/4 inch BSPT fitting to the rear of the motor and tighten with an M14 wrench. Install the parallel key to the rotor shaft. Install the bevel pinion gear to the shaft and use a wrench for leverage to push it on enough to expose the thread. Thread on the knot and tighten firmly using the special M21 and the M17 wrench. Feed the electronics harness, then the 3 power wires through the cable gland seal. Feed the electronics harness, then the 3 power wires through the cable gland knot, then tighten with an M22 wrench. Mount the electronics unit with the switch socket facing toward the cable gland and tighten the 2 M4x12 socket cap screws. Plug in the motor electronics harness, pressing with the spudger tool. Strip the motor power wires using a 1.5 square millimeter wire stripper to a length of about 6 millimeters, enough to fill the barrel of the connector. Insert the motor power wires fully into the new 1.5 millimeter square heat shrink butt connectors and crimp them using the 1.5 millimeter square notch in the crimping pliers. Fit the water feed hose to the coupling and tighten the nut with an M14 wrench. Place the right handle half close to the motor and mount the green-yellow ground wire with the M4x8 socket cap screw and lock washers. Do not fully tighten it until the handle half is mounted. Strip the motor power wires using a 1.5 square millimeter wire stripper to a length of about 6 millimeters. Mount the right handle half and install the M5x65 and M5x40 socket cap screws. Position the ground wire so that it faces inward, then final tighten the screw. Insert the motor power wires fully into the new 1.5 square millimeter heat shrink butt connectors and crimp them using the 1.5 square millimeter notch in the crimping pliers. Test each crimp to ensure a good connection. If loose, cut the connector off, restrip the wires, and use a new butt connector. Use the heat gun to shrink the insulation of each butt connector. Route the red and white switch wires in the bottom of the uppermost slot and plug into the electronics unit using the spudger tool. Route the ground wire in the bottom of the middle slot. Route the black power wire in the middle slot above the ground wire. Route the blue and brown power wires in their individual tracks and into the third slot. Place the electronics harness in the uppermost slot above the switch wires. Install the inner cable clip using the M4x14 panhead screws. Plug in the electronics harness and press with the spudger tool. Apply a layer of silicone to fully seal the connections and the LED indicator light. Insert the trigger switch actuator and spring, keeping it depressed with one finger. Install the left handle half, ensuring that no wires are pinched. Then, insert the two shorter M4x20 screws in the position shown. Insert the 4 M4x25 screws in the remaining positions. Install the M5x40 and M5x65 socket cap screws. Check the trigger switch for normal function. Refit the side handle and start the M8x40 socket cap screw, leaving it finger tight for now. Place the bracket in position and insert the M8x20 socket cap screw close to the motor. Insert the M8x16 socket cap screw in the end of the handle. Tighten the 3 screws. Insert the M4x16 socket cap screw and tighten. Mount the tension roller carrier stamped A in the upper position with the A facing up. Tighten the 2 M4x20 socket cap screws to secure the pivot pin. The M4x10 round head socket screw should use a drop of blue thread locking fluid. Repeat for the tension roller stamped B in the lower position with the B facing up. Install the tension roller, hex washer, and nylock knot, then tighten firmly. Repeat for the other side. Inspect the seal and replace if damaged. Install the larger 6201 bearing first and tap it in until it meets the shoulder using a suitable size socket. Only tap on the bearing's outer race, never the inner race. Install the internal circlip and ensure that it snaps fully into place. Install the smaller 6200 bearing and tap it in until it meets the shoulder using a suitable size socket. Again, only tap on the bearing's outer race. Install a new oil seal after first adding grease to the inner lip. Insert the guide roller axle from the inside with the shoulder facing the blade side and tap in. Mount the guide roller, hex washer, and inside knot to assist in tightening the outside knot. Thread on the outside knot and tighten using the M21 and M13 wrenches. Tighten the inside knot to fix the guide roller. Mount the guide roller, hex washer, and knot on the other side and tighten. Insert the plugs and press in place. Add 30 milliliters of EP75W90 gear oil to the gearbox. Use a new gasket on the gear plate. Mount the gear plate assembly to the gear housing and turn the spindle to ensure the gears mesh. Press the two sides together and start the M5x50 socket cap screws with spring washers. With the torque wrench set to 9 Newton meters, tighten the screws diagonally. Slightly loosen the screw of the water manifold before installing the water plate. Install the two M4x10 flathead tapping screws to attach the water plate to the water manifold first. Then install the 4 M4x10 flathead machine screws. Finally, retighten the water manifold screw. This will ensure good alignment. Engage the upper splash guard to its notch in the housing. Refit the main housing and tighten the 4 M6x30 socket cap screws and lock washers. Reinstall the blade with the grooves facing the motor side. Ensure that the grooves are engaged properly with the guide rollers. Insert the drive wheel and slacken the drive tensioner. Install the flange and arbor bolt, tightening with the lock nut wrench and T-wrench. Adjust the guide tensioner knobs just tight enough so that all slack is taken up. Adjust the drive tension so that the blade does not slip on the drive wheel, then tighten a further quarter turn. Flip the unit over and install the lower splash guard, tapping the pin into place. Tighten its fixing screw. Install the upper splash guard spring in its perch and tighten the 3/16 by 3/8 inch screw. Install the water hose and wire hose clamp.